So the moment is upon us to get to the final baking. I'm going to go back and look at this little layer here and call it the bake pieces, since these are the pieces we're going to bake. And I'm just going to reorganize the layers and put the pieces that we're not going to bake, the ones that share UVs, into a separate layer. So let's see, unhide everything so I can make sure I put them into the correct layer. Change the color on them, just strip the material. And this is all the stuff that I won't be baking for now. So I'm just going to grab all of these, create a new layer, and call it LP instance pieces, which is supposed to be pieces that are instanced and that are just going to share texture space. So these layers are no longer needed. Just going to have a look at these. There should be some low poly layers that I can just get rid of. And we've got some lofts for the tracks, which we shouldn't get rid of. And then just hide all the stuff that we don't need. So we purely have the stuff that we're baking with in an easily accessible layer. The selection sets don't really matter anymore. So what I'm going to do now is, to make it a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to detach these pieces per material ID. That means it's sort of like exploding, but I'm not actually going to explode. I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing that actually intersects. So those are low poly 03, and this one we're going to call it low poly 02. So just use the same number as the material IDs. So once we have these, we can simply just work with that. And I'm splitting these up because it's going to make it easier for one to bake the ambient occlusion with those later. And it makes it a bit more manageable for me to work with the bakes if I don't have to bake everything at once, because I fixed a few errors in the previous thing, but there's still going to be some cage tweaking now. The previous video was mainly about fixing errors with the UVs and the model. So increase the padding to 8, enable projection, and then just unhide all of these things. And the high polys have also been attached into a single object, so I've just made sure to delete all the turbo smooths and then select things by object ID and attach them. So we're going to add a normals map in here, set this one to 2K by 2K, and again for testing we're going to stick with a slightly smaller size. Got the projection modifier on there. The same thing here. I'm just going to set all three of these up with the correct settings. So picking these. And the thing is, with when you pick a cage, when you pick an object for projection that's hidden, it doesn't really update the cage straight away. It doesn't try to do that automatic cage thing because it is hidden. So we're going to have to go back with that in a moment. So the cage from the previous one with default push, we just threw that out again because it didn't really matter. It was mainly about finding the mismatches in material IDs, finding some problems with the UVs, with the model, and fixing those first before we get to the actual baking. So again, setting the options here, and then going for the super sampler. I'm going to stick with max 2.5 star first. Why? Because it's faster, but it still does some super sampling. And turning on hit only matching material ID. Well, it doesn't really matter anymore because we have separate objects, but I'm just going to turn it on anyway. Right, so I'm going to select number 02 here. Turn off hardware shading. It tends to go on sometimes when you preview with my shader, it tends to turn it on. And it doesn't really work with the cage that well. So turn on the visualization of the cage, make it shaded, reset it, and then do a push to start working with it. So we've got our shaded cage here, and now we have to find the pieces that stick out. And you can see if they're slightly darker, that means that they're intersecting the cage, and it means that we're going to have to push things a bit further, tweak things so that they're all encompassed in the cage nicely. So go slightly further. Trying to find the minimum value that can work. Right, so I've done some pushing there. Then I've hidden all the other parts. I'm going to hide everything that's not relevant anymore and go back to the cage because it's easier to see things then. I mean, really, it gets pretty difficult to see what happens. And again, doing this push. Just want to make sure that the initial generic value, which is why I reset it, works for everything. So we still see one part here that sticks out a bit too much. This is all sort of dependent on the cage because at first I want to find a global value that works, and some parts might still need some adjusting pending that. Some of it you can do by adjusting the cage, some you might really have to go in and tweak the high poly a little bit. I mean, these things are very hard to predict since they can be very, very subtle. I mean, it's a very slight offset outside of the cage can mean that the rays are missed, and we don't really want that. So, all right, let's see. And we're gonna save our normal map in the correct place. So dozer LPO2 normals map with the TGA as a TGA with 32 bits saving the alpha channel. Very important. If we don't do this, we get problems. So there's another miss here. And these ones, these are not so, some of them are not that important because some of them are just misses that happen in places where there is no high poly because low poly objects are intersecting. Like, I don't know, the bottom of the doors, for example, is not an important one because this one just sits inside the other meshes and you don't really see this problem. So first, I think those are misses that are not that important. Those are open areas. Just trying to figure out what all of these are. Because the main idea is just we want to get rid of these ray misses and we want to optimize the projection a bit. So this part looks like the high poly is probably not matching up completely there. So I'm going to go into the high poly. And see, this piece is a lot shorter as a high poly than it is as a low poly. So we're going to extend that a little bit. Show the low poly so we can work with it and just grab this and snap it to the low poly corner, which means it'll be aligned as good as we can. And then tweak it around a little bit, because apparently the snapping is completely doing what we want. So that should be it for that part. That was a really blatant ray miss. And it was hard to see because it was inside another object, but we're keeping in mind that this thing might get rigged and certain parts might extend and that sort of thing. So that's why we have to fix these things as well. So let's see, I'm looking for some other areas that might be a problem. Yeah, this thing here, this hole, is trying to bake that hole as well. And that's all fine, but we just want to avoid there being a ray miss behind it. I'm just going to select both of these, cap them, then select these two polygons. Well, it's only cap one, okay, so we're just going to do this one first. Detach it to an element, should be fine. Then do the same thing here. Select it, cap, select the polygon, and detach it. Now, why am I doing this? Well, there's a mesh shoved in there, so you don't really see it that much. But just to keep things tidy, even if you don't see it that much there, it's because it's a cylinder. You might get, because the low poly cylinder has rougher edges than the high poly, you might still see a slight bit of the ray misses coming through. So it's a part where I'm not sure that it's going to be completely obstructed. The ones where I'm sure it will be completely obstructed, I'm fixing that up. So right here at the bottom, we had some ray misses because this thing didn't have a closed bottom. And here at the doors, I'm going to extend it a little bit because it was missing quite a lot. If it's just a line of a few pixels that are hidden, it's okay. But if it's a larger field that comes out red in our bake, I do prefer to fix it up. Trying to see how far it needs to go down. Okay, so we're going to select our low poly again. And back to some tweaking of the cage. I think with these fixes that we've done, we can increase the resolution a bit so we can tell a little bit more what it's supposed to look like. So set it to 4x2K. And we're going to increase the sampler. I also set the quality to 1. Okay, now I'm going to hit render here. And obviously, once I hit render, we are speeding this up. This actually took quite a while to render, and it looks okay. So what I'm going to do now is hide the high poly and pick my little shader here, pick this normal map up and assign it just to have a look what it's giving me. And yeah, also this is looking okay. Really isn't bad. Some misses in some areas, and yeah, got something weird going on here. There's some, seems like there's some sort of faceting on there, and it's missing the bottom, which I think is because the material ID has, or yeah, it looks like the normals have been flipped on the high poly. like some sort of weird duplication has happened here. So I'm just going to select these, delete them, select this single polygon, flip it, and there we go. It looks okay. Because, I mean, inverted normals are obviously not going to be hit. And we skipped the part of fixing the faceting, but that was mainly because I was using mesh smooth, and it was giving me something weird. It was just a little bug in Max, so I fixed it by switching the smoothing method around, from going from turbo smooth to mesh smooth, that sort of thing. Can't remember exactly. It was just a little bit of switching between things. I think it's probably because the mesh was so heavy. Turbo Smooth was having problems with dealing with these things. Mesh Smooth is slower, but it did give correct results. So there we go. Just another bake. Again, this one took like 15, 20 minutes. So we've skipped ahead in time, not to let you wait for the result. So one problem with the shader is it tends to clear the normal map when you bake because of some shoddy code in Max that clears materials when you bake textures, but you just set it again. So this is starting to look a bit better. We've got some ray misses here. I'm going to export the cage and select these things. And why did I export the cage? Well, the cage is like UVs. If you change something, if you change the vertex count in the actual model, then the cage is going to be reset. But you can save it out just in case to be sure. But unlike UVs, you can't really collapse it down to save it. So I changed the smoothing groups on a part of the model where I apparently forgot them. And just to be safe, I exported it. I was sure I was not going to change the vertex count because if I do that, it's gone. You can't get the cage back. But I could still, just to be safe, when I'm not going to change the vertex count, save the cage out to get it back in case something happens. So I'm closing up these holes as well, because you don't really want to see through there. I mean, it doesn't matter. A black spot on the texture is going to work fine as well. So attach this piece and change the ID to 2. So that should work fine. And then duplicate it to both of these sides. Make sure to flip the normal for the other side of the hole. Now we're just going to select both of them, and then shift move these to cover these holes up nicely. All right, that should be a bit better already. So a few more fixes, and time to go for another bake. Give this a run. Some of these problems, I mean, it's a bit annoying that I have to bake at this quality, but some of these problems are only becoming apparent when I bake at this resolution with this quality. And since I want the best quality, it's just, that's what it takes. So after another bake, I'm going to set the normals up again and just have another look at things. And it looks like most of these things look okay. Some slight projection errors there, but not much we can do about it because it's so low poly. Most of it seems to be doing fine. This area as well seems to work. So you have to really carefully judge your normal map, just twirl it around a bit and have a look at it. And again, this is the reason why I'm trying to do this in pieces. It's really hard to do this for every single thing at the same time. You don't have to do it. You can do it with everything at the same time. Some people prefer to work like this. For me, it's just a way to make things more manageable. So I've split this up in thirds, and I try to go at it one step at a time. So for the first part, the really big ones, I've decided that's it. This piece is looking good. It's time to move to the next one. So we need to do some cage fixing here. Again, I've looked for one generic value that works for the whole thing, but I'm always going to have to go in and fix the little problematic areas. Now, I really should say this. You might not have realized this yet, but this is pretty much the most extreme, the most difficult case of normal map baking that's out there. I don't think you even want to do anything that's more complex than this. It just takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of room for human error also. So really, this thing has about, I think it's 48,000 polygons. We're not obviously baking all of those. A lot of them are instances. I would estimate that this bulldozer is about 40,000 polygons that we're baking. And that's, in my opinion, pretty much the human limit of what is what is possible to do. I mean, you could probably do more, but it's going to take so much time that it just has really become viable to do that. So again, that's why I'm really trying to split this up, trying to keep the work manageable. And it seems like it's missed the windows again there. So I'm going to try and find out what happened here. And it looks like it was actually projecting too far in, so it missed the windows. So I adjusted the cage a little bit for the windows to make sure that they aren't missed. Windows turn out to be a bit more of a hassle than I expected, even though they're just flat planes. And once we've done some more tweaks, we're going to go for another render. That done after a slightly less long time, but still considerable. I always keep hiding the high poly just so that I have a clear view on the low poly. I mean, makes sense. Most of this is looking good. These parts are already a bit simpler than the big complex thing that we've been working with before. So I'm also trying to go from the hardest to the easier parts. So I would say that these red pieces are the easiest one. The blue ones are slightly trickier. So the red one's done. I'm going to move on to the blue ones. Number 03. So you can see they also get lower in count. That's just how it ended up. I didn't really do this on purpose, but I'm trying to go from most difficult to least difficult. And you could see that the red one didn't take as much time to get to bake correctly as the green one did. So just performing a push here, seeing what this is doing. This area is a bit tricky, so I'm going to have to move that out. And it looks like on the high poly, this extra thing that sits on the top, you can see those, it's like, I don't know, this fishtail shaped thing at the top is sticking out a bit much. So see what we do with that. Just adjust, we can adjust the high poly for that. Just go ahead and move the high poly like we've done before. Now this piece here, again, nothing too difficult. Moving the cage out slightly. And here at the back, again, just take the cage, move it backwards a little bit. Okay, so with some of these cage tweaks done, first I want to, of course, get the cage to, at the first sight, look okay. There might always be errors apparent only after baking, but just try and go at it as much as possible. We've skipped a few parts here because it's a pretty straightforward process. It's just look at the shaded cage, make sure that nothing is intersecting with the cage, adjust the cage. If try and stick the cage as close as possible to everything. Just don't go too far with it, and if that's not an option, then just go and adjust the meshes. So that's sort of looking okay. Let's see, and there we go. Sometimes the shader has a problem with using a newly baked file, so I actually have to go and create a duplicate with a different name, rename it, and then use that one instead. It actually updates. There you go. So it was still using a low resolution version because that was in memory. Once I updated this, I could just look at the newer version. So this is looking pretty good. Don't think there's that much more to tweak here, so we're going to put this back on. Let's see, I think a few areas need some fixing. And so assign the material to everything here. And obviously, if we want to see everything at the same time, we're going to have to combine the maps in Photoshop. So we're going to bring up Photoshop here, take all these maps and put them in. So one by one, drop them in. And annoyingly in Photoshop CS5, you have to drop them at that top bar. That's this annoying default behavior. So to get them to another file, I use the alpha as a selection mask, duplicate the things on the layer. So alpha selection mask, duplicate them, then go to layer, and duplicate it to another document. You can actually duplicate layers between documents by using layer, duplicate layer, and then picking another document. Because if you just go select everything and paste, it doesn't paste in the exact same position as it had on the other file. So I always use layer, duplicate layer. It's super annoying that it doesn't really paste in the center, so this is a safe way to do it. So obviously with the alpha channels as masks, I mentioned these were very important, so that's why you need them. I save this out as a complete composited file. And now I'm going to load that file up in the shader. Go into the shader, select this one, open up the normal map. There we go. Now we can see everything at the same time. So that is looking pretty good. Now the instances, we should also assign the same material. And with that done, I'm going to set max into expert mode and just have a look. And that is looking pretty good. The gun is obviously a bit low res in mesh, but it's only if you look up close, and you're never really going to see it that close up. So just have a look around. Seems like most of it is in an okay state. Some parts could do with some tweaking. This one needs to be duplicated to the other side again. Gonna mirror it. Seems like we forgot about that one. So yeah, I'm liking most of this. I think it could be good. Let's see. Alright, so next up, the tracks. These are a special exception. Actually, in the previous DVD, I created these tracks as a full loop model that completely fits into place. Here's a little secret and a little revelation. You don't really need that to bake these tracks. I want these tracks to use a separate tiling texture. The reason I want to use a tiling texture and not model all the pieces of track out is because if I want to get this into a game engine, having every piece of track separate and rigging them is not a technically viable option. It's just completely impossible to have dynamic rotating tracks with models per track link. You cannot do that. So this is just the way that they've done it in, for example, Unreal Tournament 2007, and even in Unreal Tournament 3. I think there's a tank in there. And the tracks of the tank are just a tiling texture that scrolls along the tracks, and it gives a pretty decent impression of movement in the tracks. I mean, it's not perfect, but there are some interesting tricks to make it better these days. So we'll see what we do with that once we get to that point sometime in the future. But for now, we're just going to bake a tiling texture here. So I've got this straight piece, which is using the same cross section that the actual model of the loft is using, which means it will have the same UVs. So I've turned on the UVs, making sure that this thing is all looking correct. And then I'm going to open up the UV editor. And the UVs are actually rotated incorrectly. They're going from top to bottom. And I'm thinking they're scaled incorrectly. If they go from top to bottom, it doesn't really matter. They can go from left to right, top to bottom, doesn't matter. So I'm going to have a look at this one. And the mapping on this one, what I'm trying to do is look at the length. So it's 233 divided by 5.823, which is the amount of times that the piece we're going to bake fits in there, which means we need about 6 times tiling to fit the texture from the small piece that we're going to bake to the large one. So we're going to bake 1/6 of the texture and then repeat it 6 times along that mesh. So we're just going to assign this one here. Have a look. It looks like it's not deforming too badly, the texture, so that's pretty good. Okay. So the taller purple one I made here, we're not really going to use that. I mean, I just created it just in case, but it looks like the short one should work. So we have this separate piece here. I'm going to call this one HP Tracks Bake, because we're not going to bake with the complete looping around version. We just need a separate one here. We can still use the track link. And I'm going to position this one at about the correct height at which I hope to bake it. Get in there as much as I can. I'm going to move it something like this. Because obviously we need them to stick out at the back and the front so that we have the overlap ready to go for the tiling. Something like that. And then I'm going to duplicate this one at about such a distance, but I'm thinking like duplicating it not going to be the best solution. So I'm just going to go and use that train maker script, which I used in the previous video also. We should include it again. And then the train maker instances this piece, like a wagon of a train, over the railroad tracks, which is the spline. And you can just set the repeat and just pretty much it's really easy to space things along a path. You can get the correct spacing pretty easily. I'm trying to adjust the pivot a little bit. It's offsetting things a little bit. I mean, it must have, somewhere along the way, the correct pivot from the previous DVD must have gotten lost slightly. So, okay, so once we have it aligned correctly, I'm going to spread out this distance a bit. And obviously we need to get the correct amount of tracks over this thing. Increase the number of wagons. 5. This should be the correct spacing. We still need a few more in there. So 6. Yeah, 7, 8. That looks about right. And just move them slightly back, because it's hard to get the Trainmaker script to place wagons backwards on the track. You can get them to go over the track at the other end. We're just moving them backwards so we get the correct tiling. So we still need one last piece at that end to stick out a little bit. So let's see. Take this thing. And now we're going to move the mesh around a little bit so we can align this with the exact spot where the back of the mesh stops. So at this point, right between the, right on this specific edge is where one end of the tiling texture is going to stop. And at this other end, you need to pick the exact same spot to also tile these things. So turn off snapping. We're going to snap that exact same spot. So you can tell it's between the big round link and the oval one. In between there's an edge which I specifically want to snap to. You might be thinking, aren't you distorting the UVs? But it doesn't matter. I mean, the UVs are set to exactly tile 6 times. If you have a slight distortion because of length, it doesn't really matter. If you really want to, you can do all the calculations to figure out how large the track pieces need to be, how many of them you need, etc. But I've already rounded things off by using 6 instead of 5.833 in terms of tiling. So set up the baking, set up the samplers, and we're just going to do a first test bake. The map size is going to be 512 by 512. I'll pick all the wagons to add them. Obviously, the cage is completely messed up. And very important also for the cage, we cannot have it have the cage go too far. I mean, you really can't have the cage go over that one side there. So I'm just going to try and reset it a little bit and manually move every single edge of the cage out so it encompasses the mesh. And select all these top ones, move it up. I'll make sure I don't select the bottom ones. So select all those at the top, move them up so everything's in there. Select all of them at the side, scale them out so everything's in there. Then in front view, it's a little bit easier to work in this view. Move this down so everything's in there like that. That down. Scale these parts out. Scale these parts in. And now everything should be in there. And take note that the front and the back edges, I haven't moved those along the y-axis. So we're getting some slight misses in the center, but most of it, this is already looking pretty good. It's a simple thing, so as you can see, it really doesn't take as much work to set up as a complex thing. So I'm going to create a box at the center here to catch the mist rays. Because there are apparently some holes, some gaps in the high poly mesh, which, you know, it happens. Not much we can do about that. But I am going to try and close it up. So just create a little box here that we're going to use to fill that area up. Leave the front and back. Actually, I can just use a plane for this thing. I'm going to call it blocker. And then add the blocker in here as well. I'm trying to see, it's not showing the blocker. There we go. Okay, so the blocker's added, render it. See some blue? Blocker's sticking out a little bit too far, so we're going to have to move it down. And yeah, you can see here, that's not exactly good. It needs to sit lower, something like that. That's the area that it should block, the part where you shouldn't be able to see through. Okay. So blockers in place. So we're going to unhide things again and fire this up for another render. And that's looking good. So we're going to increase the resolution a bit. Enable the hammer slice sampler with a 1.0 quality. And there we go, that's our bake. So now the big moment is going to be when we assign the texture that was baked for a different object onto our final actual splines. So I'm just going to go in, assign this, cut the normal map, should we turn off flip green, and there you go. It's actually inverted though, it's going from front to back, so I'm going to have to flip that around in the UVs. But this is looking decent. It's also missing some black rays there. See if we fix them. I mean, they're supposed to be black anyway, so it should be fine. So rotate this one. 180 is not really going to work. 90. By the way, the UVWX4 modifier is a very interesting one to modify your UVs in simple operations. Like you can just mirror them and see if we do a flip, we can actually get them to run the correct way. Now, let's see. We actually need to have a look at these holes, and it's probably because, yeah, they're just projecting straight through these holes, so we're going to have to close them up. So let's see what we can do about that. Select this mesh, move it out a little bit because we're getting some misses at that point. It's actually going to look better if you move it a bit further out. And this thing is also sitting a bit too far back, so I want to move it forward. I mean, this might not be completely correct with the real life thing, but it's going to look better in the bake, which is what actually matters. So here we go, another render, and some of the skewing is actually fixed. So we of course need to update the normal map. And I annoyingly need to create another duplicate of this, because otherwise it won't update. And that does look better. The holes are still black, but that's fine because they're supposed to be black. So here we go, our normal map on our mesh. And to show you the whole point, what I'm going to do is actually animate these. So turn on auto key, move the key over to the other side, and then offset the UVs by a certain unit. Let's say we offset 100 units. They're actually going really, really fast, so that's a bit too much. Back to about 20 units. What's this do? It's still pretty fast. So I'm just going to delete these keys, set it to linear, and then, because you want these to be linear, otherwise they're going to like start up and slow down. And it's still kind of fast. So let's see, auto key, set this, it's going to go from 0 to 1 over a single, and it actually needs to go from 0 to -1. So there we go. Just trying to find out the correct value. And there you go. Tiling texture makes it look like the low poly thing is actually writing. It's actually moving along. So this is what I wanted all along. You just cannot get this in a feasible, easy way when you actually model these pieces out. So that's almost it for all this normal map baking. I'm just going to assign it to the other side there. And let's see. Yeah, for these track pieces, might want to hide them again to a layer where we can see what we're doing. Let's unhide everything. The low poly mesh has got the material stripped again, so we're just going to put it back on there. Let's create a new shader. And the green one is actually the cage, which we don't really want to use. So there you go. Baked normals with animated tracks. Next up is going to be the ambient occlusion.